Work DataVault. I'm Shruti.
I'm Isabella. I'm Sabina.
I'm Olivia. I'm Sana.
And I'm Gabby.
Okay, so what is our problem first off? So every time that you open an app, access a website, or make a purchase, companies are taking your data and they have been using that and selling them for years. So for example, just to sign up for a simple reward system, they usually need your name, phone number, email address, and more. And then with that, whenever you make a purchase, you start getting emails or targeted ads based on what you were looking at. So companies have been selling our data for years, and it has become a standard business practice for them. So with data brokers, advertisers, and platforms, they have all built models around using our personal information and profiting off of it. However, the person whose data it really is never receives any of that profit. So because of this, there's a disconnect between consumers and their trust. And that's because they have no idea what their data is being used for or who it's being sold to. So studies show that over 79% of people want more control over their data, but there's been no way for them to act on this. So with the current process, a company can get your data by either taking it from a broker or hiding it in an agreement that no one really reads through, such as terms of service. And then with that, there's weak user trust again, because users are being taken advantage of. And that leads us to our business problem, where companies are spending billions and billions of dollars on these targeted ads, but there's no trust or consent behind the data that they're buying from us. And then DataVault is going to fix this by creating consent-backed and data verified by blockchain, and then it's also audited transaction by transaction. So that makes the data that we use be more valuable, and users can be paid now for sharing something that they once did for free.
So what this looks like for DataVault is we're going to have 3 separate services. We're going to have 2 available for users. There's going to be the protection side and the selling side. On the protection side, users can pay for their data protection, and this would look like keeping a minimum balance in their account. And DataVault would charge a monthly transaction or subscription every month for the users. And then on the selling side, the users would be able to receive tokens for the data that they want to share. And this is categorized into buyers for the companies to request specific amounts of data that they want from the users. And in order to facilitate an incentive for our validators for this transaction, we are going to take a small percentage of the transaction fees, about 0.25%, and that is allocated towards the validators. And 1% of the transaction fees, the total transaction fees, will go to us for DataVault. And this allows for the transparency and autonomy of the users so that they know where their data is going and how they can best allocate where they want their information. And then on the buyer side, companies can request specific pieces of data, and the price that comes with this varies with how difficult the demand may be of the request. So let's say a company wants to see specific users' credit card transactions over the past month. This might cost more than where the user's been in their location access over the past month. So that would cost a little bit more. And this also allows for a direct source of information between the user and the buyers.
So for the steps, the first step is you download first like the browser extension or the app, and then you set like the data preferences. And then the second step, the company selects the target users plus the data. And then the third step, the user sees the request in the dashboard, and then they're like approves or rejects based on like the data type, the purpose, the time duration. And then the fourth step, the transaction is securely stored and it creates a transparent audit trail. And then you confirm consent, it's like real and valid. And then there's a smart contract that is automatically, so it splits into 85% user, 10% validators, and 5% platform. And then finally, that access is limited in space.
All right, and then a little bit about why blockchain. The biggest reason is decentralization. So with the database, usually one entity would be in charge of the data. And a good example would be, I think of Google or Meta, how your accounts are all linked and all your data is in their hands. With blockchain, the data would be distributed better. There'd be many nodes, and this kind of goes into the ownership and sovereignty as well. So with traditional browsers, they're storing and monetizing user data where they can. With blockchain, across all different platforms, there's private keys and you can like choose permissions for who sees which parts of your data basically. And then that also helps with integrity and protection. Basically, it's tamper resistant when you use blockchain. So you can't really alter it or manipulate it outside of like what you intend. And then the trustless verification part is where you don't need central authority. And so you can share without worrying about like exposure with your data. So we have like a comparison, for example, like Brave is like ad blocker, it tracked, it has like attention, but with DataVault, there would be storage and control. So you have your personal data there, but you can also choose controlled access for other people. And you can monetize and share selectively, so it's not just like all your data is in one place and then it gets used and monetized without your control.
So moving on to the token economics, our token economics are designed to directly tie value to real data usage. So first, the companies must purchase DBT in order to access user data. So demand for the token is driven by actual business need, not just speculation around what would possibly be needed. So when a company submits a request, their DBT is held in escrow by a smart contract. And then the token is only released once a user explicitly grants consent, which ensures that data is always permission-based. And then after that, validators confirm the transaction through the proof of history system, and the payment is distributed, as we talked about, the 85% to the user, 10% to the validator, and 5% to the protocol treasury. And finally, access to the data is temporary and automatically revoked, which reinforces control and trust. Overall, this model preserves value by restricting supply, tying demand to real usage, and aligning incentives across user companies and validators.
So we did identify 6 different challenges. The first one, which is the most important, is token regulatory risk. This is because DataVault would be its own token, so we would have to go through an ICO process, and therefore it is subject to scrutiny through SEC guidelines. So if our token isn't approved, then we would have to pivot and do something else. For number 2, it would be chicken and egg adoption. This is because we rely on both businesses and consumers to come together to use this platform. However, whenever we are first starting, it is kind of hard to try to incentivize both of the parties because neither parties are necessarily established yet. For third, it is transaction scale. Because this is a blockchain application, and it is using proof of history, it can be hard to have speed or quick transactions, especially whenever you are using user data that does work is going very quickly. For fourth, as we talked about earlier, Brave is a competitor. So we would have to be trying to mainly use their audience and try to persuade their customers. For fifth would be hiding the crypto. This is because we want to make an application that doesn't really feel like a crypto or doesn't feel really confusing for users. We want this to be very intuitive and have a understanding or an appealing UI or UX. And then lastly, companies may not self-report. In the US, we don't have any restrictions on user data or governance. So we would have to motivate companies to want to use this blockchain. However, in other countries, like for example, in the EU, they do have this type of restriction. So it would be easier to implement this over there, but we would have to overcome that over here. And then lastly, we do have our smart contract that follows our token economics. We broke it down into a table of what it does, and then we actually have the code on the right side. So for the first one, it would be companies would request your data, and the code would reflect a record consent. For second, it would be users will approve of the request, which would be a grant consent. And then the validators will confirm this happened using a verified data delivery. And then lastly, the token will auto split into the 3 different groups that we talked about earlier, which was users, validators, and treasury. using the release payment function. So this is everything that we have came up with so far. Are there